All right, if you're gunning for that grade 9 in GCSE history, you know that Elizabeth's crisis years are a massive topic. But what if we could nail it down right here, right now? So let's dive in and see how the so-called Virgin Queen stared down nearly 2 decades of constant threats to hold onto her throne. You've got to understand, from 1569 to 1588, Queen Elizabeth I wasn't just ruling, she was surviving. Seriously. She was facing this perfect storm of threats from inside her own country and from the outside, and honestly, any one of them could have been the end of her reign. But here's the thing, this isn't just going to be a boring list of dates and names. We're going to get strategic. We're going to focus on what the examiners are really looking for, your ability to connect these events and explain why they mattered. That right there, that's the secret to a grade 9.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a bird's eye view of the crisis years. Then, we'll zoom in on the plots brewing at home and the massive threat looming from Spain. It all builds to the legendary Armada, and we'll finish with the really important bit, exactly how to use all this knowledge to write a top-grade answer. Okay, so for the first 10 years of her reign, things were relatively quiet. But then, 1569 hits, and everything changes. For the next 20 years or so, Elizabeth faces this relentless series of challenges. It was like she was running a gauntlet, testing her leadership to the absolute limit.
Just look at this timeline. You can literally see the pressure cooker building. It kicks off with an open rebellion, right? But then it gets sneakier, going underground with all these secret plots. And it all leads to the execution of a rival queen and, finally, a full-blown invasion attempt. See how each event just ups the ante for the next one?
Right, let's start with the danger brewing at home, the enemy within. The biggest, most constant threat came from English Catholics, who were desperate to get a Catholic monarch back on the throne. This first really blew up in 1569 with the revolt of the Northern Earls. It was a massive challenge, for sure. But when it failed, did the plotting stop? Not a chance. It just got smarter. It went underground.
And you know what? All those secret plots, the Ridolfi, Throckmorton, and Babington plots, they all basically followed the same script. Think of it like a playbook. They weren't just random attacks, they were variations on the same theme. And who was at the very heart of every single plan? Mary, Queen of Scots.
So for every threat, there has to be a response, right? Well, to fight these secret plots, Elizabeth's spy master Sir Francis Walsingham built something truly incredible. He created this amazing network of spies, informants, and code breakers. It was basically England's first ever secret service, and its one job was to hunt down these conspiracies.
And in the end, Walsingham's network did its job. They caught Mary, Queen of Scots, red-handed, giving her support to the Babington plot. Now, Elizabeth had been putting this off for years, but this time, the proof was undeniable. She had to act. But look at the significance here. Executing Mary was huge. Yes, it got rid of the #1 internal threat, but in doing so, it lit the fuse on a much, much bigger external one. It was the final provocation Philip of Spain needed.
Which leads us perfectly to the Spanish shadow. Because while all this plotting was happening in England, tensions with the global superpower of the day, Catholic Spain, were hitting a boiling point. The two countries were on an absolute collision course.
Now, you can boil this whole rivalry down to 3 key things, and this is super useful for your revision: religion, politics, and money. First, religion. Philip of Spain saw himself as Europe's Catholic champion. Second, politics. Elizabeth was sneakily helping Protestant rebels in the Netherlands fight against Spanish rule. And third, money. Or maybe we should call it piracy.
Just let that number sink in for a second. English privateers, who were basically state-sponsored pirates, like the famous Sir Francis Drake, were robbing Spanish ships blind. On a single voyage, Drake stole treasure worth the same as the English crown's entire annual income. I mean, you can imagine how furious this made the Spanish. And, in a classic power move, Elizabeth publicly claimed she had nothing to do with it while secretly taking a huge cut of the treasure and knighting Drake on the deck of his ship. Just brilliant.
And you can just feel the sheer outrage in this quote from the Spanish ambassador, can't you? He called Drake the master thief of the unknown world. For Spain, this wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. Okay, so let's bring these two threads together now. The internal plots and the external rivalry are about to merge into one final epic showdown. This was England's great test. With Mary, Queen of Scots gone, Philip II lost his main excuse for a peaceful Catholic takeover. So what was his only option left? A massive, full-scale invasion to take Elizabeth off the throne by force. Enter the Spanish Armada. But the English weren't just sitting around waiting.
In 1587, Drake launched this unbelievably bold surprise attack on the Spanish port of Cadiz. He sailed right in, torched ships, and destroyed supplies. It was cheekily called singeing the King of Spain's beard. And it was a genius move. It didn't stop the Armada, no, but it delayed it by a whole year, which gave England critical time to get ready.
Okay, this slide is absolute gold for revision because it breaks down exactly why the English won. It's the classic story of two totally different fighting styles. The Spanish had these huge, slow galleons built to get up close, grapple, and put soldiers on enemy ships. But the English had smaller, faster, more nimble ships with better long-range cannons that could reload quicker. Their whole tactic was to stay away and just hammer the Spanish from a distance. That mismatch was everything. So, to sum it up, if an exam question asks why the English won against the Armada, here are your go-to points. 1. Better ships and tactics. 2. The really smart use of fire ships to cause chaos and break the Spanish formation. 3. Poor Spanish planning and leadership. And 4. A massive stroke of luck with the weather, that famous Protestant wind that smashed the rest of the Armada to pieces.
Right, listen up, because this is probably the most important part of this whole explainer. How do you take everything we've talked about and forge it into a grade 9 answer? The secret is to go beyond just saying what happened.
I mean, look at the difference here. It's night and day. A decent answer lists the facts, but a great answer explains the links. It doesn't just say the Babington plot was a threat. It says the Babington plot gave Walsingham the proof he needed to finally convince Elizabeth to execute Mary, which in turn was the final trigger for Philip to launch the Armada. Do you see that chain of cause and consequence? You're not just listing ingredients, you're explaining the recipe. That's grade 9 thinking.
So, here it is, your grade 9 takeaway. If you remember nothing else, remember these 3 things. First, connect the dots. Show the examiner that you see the line running from the Catholic plots to Mary's execution, all the way to the Armada. Second, always explain why. Why was this important? What happened because of it? And third, think in terms of threat and response. The plots were the threat, Walsingham's spy network was the response. The Armada was the threat, the new English Navy was the response.
So yeah, Elizabeth survived. She ran the gauntlet and came out the other side, her throne safer than ever. The defeat of the Armada wasn't just a defensive victory, it was legendary. It announced England's arrival on the world stage as a serious naval power, marking the beginning of Spain's slow decline and, you could argue, the very start of England's rise.